I want you to imagine for just a second that you are part of an excavation. Right?
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, so you're out in a field, the sun is just beating down on you, and suddenly your shovel hits metal. You are digging up a time capsule that was buried, say, 50 years ago.
Right, a classic time capsule.
Exactly. And when you open a time capsule, as the person making that discovery, there's this implicit expectation of objective preservation.
Yeah, you want the pristine history.
Right. You expect to find a crisp daily newspaper folded neatly in a plastic bag, or maybe a perfectly minted coin, or, I don't know, a popular toy still perfectly sealed in its shrink wrap. You essentially expect a museum exhibit.
Which is, what we usually think of when we talk about preserving history.
Yeah.
You're expecting a completely clean, pristine snapshot of an era. You want the culture presented as a fixed, visible object that you can just, point to, categorize on a shelf and say, okay, this is exactly what life was like back then.
But imagine you crack the seal on this vault, and instead of that objective newspaper and the shiny coin, you find a battered, deeply personal, 10,000-word handwritten diary.
Oh, wow. Just a massive diary.
Yeah, and the pages aren't just recounting the news of the day. They are frantic. It's just one person ranting with absolute burning passion about a local garage band that only ever played 3 shows.
That's amazing.
Right. They are completely dissecting the lyrics, agonizing over a missed chord progression, and literally blaming the bassist for ruining their entire summer.
See, that completely shatters the objective lens right there, because suddenly you aren't looking at the culture itself anymore. You are looking at the intensely subjective, messy reflection of that culture through a single, highly opinionated human mind.
Exactly.
And in a lot of ways, that's actually a far more accurate historical record. I mean, it doesn't tell you what happens. It tells you how what happened made someone feel.
And that scenario, that exact shift in perspective, is the core mission of our deep dive today. Because you, the listener, have sent us this massive stack of translated transcripts, forum posts, and video essays from a brilliant Israeli YouTube channel called Cartoonime.
Yeah, and it's quite a stack.
It's huge. So our mission today is to dig through this single fan's 14-year digital footprint to really uncover the hidden psychology of how we consume localized media. Because media history isn't just a ledger of what was broadcast or, what was profitable.
Right. It's not just a spreadsheet of ratings.
Exactly. It's a permanent record of how it was received by the people sitting on the living room floor.
And on the surface, if you were just casually scrolling past on YouTube, this creator's content looked like, standard internet listicle. Just a voiceover counting down favorite animated shows from the mid-2000s.
The classic top 10 format, yeah.
Exact. But underneath that very standard format, the creator actually provides this profound, almost forensic window into the psychology of global fandom. It's not just a review channel. It is a live, ongoing psychological case study.
So we are going to take you through this single fan's decades-long obsession with animated shows, and we're talking big ones, from Yu-Gi-Oh! And Bakugan to Death Note and The Legend of Korra.
A really diverse lineup.
Yeah, and along the way, we are going to explore the chaotic economics of global localization, the absolute trauma of algorithmic copyright enforcement, and the profound, life-altering parasocial relationships that viewers build with localized.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this.
So we really need to start at the foundational layer of this fans' media consumption, which is characterized by a massive visceral resistance to modern iterations of the franchises they love.
Oh, the hatred for reboots is real.
Oh, absolutely. They have this deep, simmering frustration with canceled shows and an absolute disdain for modern reboots.
Oh.
In the source material you sent over, they specifically target a brand new reboot of a show called Bakugan, just completely dismissing it as terrible, soulless, and objectively worse compared to the original era.
Which brings up one of the most fascinating historical anomalies of the entire animation. Because the original Bakugan, the specific run that this fan reveres as an absolute untouchable masterpiece, was actually considered a total commercial failure in its home country of Japan.
Right. It was completely dead in the water. I mean, if you look at the Japanese market in the late 2000s, incredibly oversaturated with monster battling and toy tie-in properties.
Yeah, the market was just packed.
Totally packed. You had massive entrenched titans like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Digimon taking up literally all the oxygen. Bakugan was an original intellectual property trying to carve out market share in a demographic that was already spending all of it.
Kids only have so much cash.
Exact. The ratings simply weren't there. And the domestic toy sales were just flatlined.
Wait, okay. I need to pause. Because if the show was a total flop, how did it end up becoming this defining pillar of childhood nostalgia for a kid sitting in Israel or, for kids watching in the United States?
It's all because the North American market had a sudden vacuum. The Beyblade craze, which was all about those spinning tops, had cooled down a few years prior.
Right. Beyblade was huge and then just sort of faded.
Right. And so Western syndicators and toy distributors were desperately hunting for a new, cool toy game hybrid that could replicate that massive playground success. They were literally scouting the globe for absolutely anything that had a tactile, physical gimmick.
And Bakugan definitely had the gimmick. I mean, for anyone who didn't play it, the toys were these little magnetic marbles, right? You would roll them onto a metal card, and the magnet would trigger a tiny spring inside, causing the marble to instantly pop open and transform into a little plastic dragon or robot.
Yeah, it was super satisfying. And Western companies looked at the underlying mechanics of those toys, the sensory satisfaction of the magnet catching and that spring popping, and realized it was the perfect tactile experience for Western kids.
So they just bought it up.
Pretty much. North American companies swooped in, bought the rights for pennies on the dollar, localized the show, stripped out some of the cultural nuances, heavily marketed it across the West, and turned it into a multi-million-dollar global phenomenon.
It is the ultimate example of the tail wagging the narrative. Like, the economic infrastructure of localization actively rewrote the cultural intent and destiny of the franchise. The original creators probably had a specific artistic vision for where the story was going, but suddenly their entire survival dictated that they cater explicitly to what an executive in a Western boardroom thought would sell more magnetic marbles.
Yeah, the show was kept on life support strictly by foreign capital. And when foreign capital dictates the production of art, the art fundamentally changes to appease the foreign palate.
But looking at the YouTuber's visceral, angry reaction to the new Bakugan reboot today, I mean, are they really critiquing the objective quality of the new animation, or are they simply experiencing a fossilization of their own palate?
That is the core psychological question fandom right there.
It's like going back to your favorite childhood diner, right? You sit in the exact same booth, you order the mac and cheese you loved when you were 12, and it tastes completely different. It just feels bland.
Right.
So you immediately blame the new chef. You go online and write a review saying the recipe is ruined, the ingredients are cheap, the soul of the diner is dead. But the truth is, the recipe hasn't changed a single ounce.
No, your palate changed.
Yeah.
You grew up. You ate at nice restaurants.
Yeah.
Your taste buds physically matured.
Exactly. And you aren't just mourning the mac and cheese, you are mourning the absence of the feeling you had.
Oh, completely. When fans reject new reboots and pine for the canceled eras of their youth, they aren't merely critiquing modern animation techniques or script writing. They are implicitly stating, the person I was when I watched that old animation was happy. Fans fall in love with the era in which they consume the media.
You fall in love with the feeling of coming home from school, dropping your heavy backpack on the floor, ignoring your homework, and just turning on the TV. The new show, regardless of its objective quality, cannot magically recreate the neurological baseline stress-free pre.
It's impossible.
But fans demand that it does, and when it fails, they perceive it as a betrayal of the lore.
And you can really see how seriously they treat the lore of that specific 12-year-old era. The Cartoonime creator dives into the deep lore of Bakugan with utter reverence.
Oh yeah, they take it so...
To a casual adult observer, this is basically a 22-minute commercial for shooting plastic marbles at a piece of cardboard. But to this fan, at that highly plastic, formative age, it carried the emotional weight of a Shakespearean tragedy. The literal stakes of the universe rested.
And it's not just toy sales that dictate how these localized shows are, right? It's the bizarre executive-level translation that completely redefined the state for a foreign audience. I mean, you sent us notes on the show in Inazuma 11. Walk me through it. What happened there?
Oh, Inazuma 11. So it's a massively popular sports anime about soccer. But for the localized broadcast, the translation team made a seemingly minor but highly disruptive change to the core premise. They inexplicably translated the character school from a middle school to a high school.
Wait, really? Just changed their ages?
Yep. And this is despite the fact that the characters are clearly depicted, drawn, and written to behave exactly like 8th grade.
The YouTuber talks about how deeply confusing this was for them as a kid watching in Israel. They remember sitting there wondering if the Japanese educational system just lacked middle schools entirely.
Right.
Or if kids in Japan simply started high school at a much younger, shorter age. The visual data just did not match the audio data.
And you can trace that exact type of localization decision back to Western broadcasting theory of the 1990s and early 2000s, specifically this concept of aspirational aspirational view.
Okay, can you give me an ELI 5 on aspirational viewing? Like, how does that broadcasting theory actually work in practice?
Sure. So the theory posits that children do not want to watch characters who are exactly their own age or younger. Localizers and network executives truly believe that kids prefer to look up to characters who are slightly older than them, representing who they wanted to be in a few years.
Got it. So it's about looking up to the cool older.
Exactly. So if your target demographic for a toy commercial is a 10-year-old, you make the protagonists 14. If your target is 14, you make them high school. It's basically a psychological hack to make the characters seem cooler and more authoritative to the viewer.
So they just assume kids would find high schoolers cooler, completely disregarding the fact that the visual language, the emotional maturity, the petty conflicts, and literally the physical height of the characters were rigidly designed by the original Japanese creators for middle schoolers.
It creates a mess.
It completely distorts the viewer's understanding of the stakes. If an 8th grader throws a temper tantrum about a soccer game, it makes sense. But if a high school senior does it, they look incredibly immature.
Yeah, it creates a massive tonal whiplash for the viewer. You are receiving visual data that says child, but auditory data that says young adult. And, speaking of the clash between visual and auditory data, we have to talk about the incredible broadcast anomaly of Ed and Eddy in Israel.
Oh my gosh, this is one of the wildest programming decisions I've ever heard of.
It really is.
So for anyone unfamiliar, Eddy is a pure, chaotic, Western slapstick cartoon about 3 idiot kids scamming their neighbors for jawbreakers in a suburban cul-de-sac. It's incredibly loud, it's weird, and you'd expect it to air Saturday morning right next to SpongeBob, right?
That's where it belongs.
But in Israel, it was broadcast late at night in English with Hebrew subtitles.
Which is an utterly bizarre programming decision for a children's slapstick comedy.
Right.
The creator notes that this late-night subtitled slot on the Israeli network Arutz Hayilidim was strictly reserved for mature, scary, or violent programming.
Right.
They specifically mentioned that the dark, violent, blood-heavy anime Inuyasha shared that exact same time slot.
Just imagine the sheer psychological confusion of turning on your TV at midnight. You're expecting a block of gritty, mature foreign cinema, or an intense anime with demons and swords, and suddenly you get a subtitled episode of 3 cartoon characters whose tongues are green, just screaming about quarters.
It really highlights how haphazard and fragmented international media licensing was in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Networks outside the U.S. would buy bulk package deals of content just to fill hours.
Just to have something on the screen.
Exactly. They would take these shows and slot them into the schedule wherever they had dead air, complete, regardless of the psychological expectation of the audience or the intended demographic of the original show.
But the brilliant takeaway here from the YouTuber's experience is that the physical comedy bypassed the linguistic processing center of the brain entirely.
Yes.
The creator admits they were way too young to read the Hebrew subtitles fast enough to actually understand the dialogue, but they still consider the show a comedic mess.
Because think about it. If an anime character delivers a 10-minute, highly technical monologue about the rules of a magical card game, and you don't speak the language, you are completely lost.
Yeah, the narrative just dies right there.
But if a cartoon character gets hit in the face with a giant flying ironing board,
the physics of that joke translate perfect, whether you're sitting in a living room in Ohio or a living room in Tel Aviv. Slapstick is a universal global language. The brain doesn't need a dictionary to understand velocity, meaning, and opposite.
Exactly. But while slapstick can bypass language, dramatic narrative absolutely cannot. The infrastructure of localization doesn't just dictate the plot points and the comedy. It fundamentally dictates the emotional core of the characters through the localized voices the audience bonds.
And this is where the deep dive gets incredible, because the literal physical auditory experience of these shows is something this fan is fiercely, almost aggressively protective of. Which brings us to the casting of Beyblade's terrifying ultimate villain, a character named Ryuga.
Yeah, the voice casting in the Israeli dub for Ryuga is a staggering juxtaposition of intent and execute. Within the narrative of the show, the character is essentially a demon. He is defined by unyielding rage, dark power, and just an imposing presence.
Total nightmare of a character.
Right. And he was voiced in Hebrew by an actor named Liran Lev,
who is a pop singer, not just a guy who sings in his car. He placed fourth on the massive Israeli reality TV competition, Kokav Nolad, which is literally their equivalent of American Idol.
Yep.
You have a reality stage pop vocalist stepping into a recording booth to voice the ultimate anime villain.
And most people would assume a pop singer would be entirely wrong for a demonic warlord, right? But what the creator's analysis reveals is how the specific physiology of a trained singer informed the character.
Oh, this is so cool.
Because a trained singer has incredible breath control, resonance, and dynamic range. Lauren Lev didn't just growl his lines into the microphone like a typical cartoon villain. He brought a theatrical rhythm to the monologue. He treated the villain's speeches like sheet music. He gave this demon an aria of arrogance.
An aria of phrasing. Think about the voice of your own childhood heroes or villains. Like when you hear James Earl Jones as Darth Vader, you aren't just hearing a script, you are hearing the specific resonance of his vocal cords. That specific vocal fingerprint became so deeply ingrained in the conscious that this Israeli fan literally cannot imagine the character of Ryuga existing without that exact breath.
But forming that intense Parasocial bond with a localized voice creates a massive vulnerability for the viewer. And that vulnerability is exposed when we look at the fragile economics of small localization markets.
Right. Because in a primary market like Japan or the United States, you have massive talent. If an actor is unavailable, you have hundreds of understudies who can mimic the voice. But in a localized market like Israel, the studios just do not have the budget or the population density to support thousands of voices.
Right. They rely on a very tight-knit group of versatile, hardworking professionals. The creator notes that one specific voice actor, Zvika Foreman, voiced up to 200 different characters across various franchises.
200. I mean, he is practically talking to himself in every single scene of the broadcast block. He is the entire background noise of a generation.
But these actors are human beings who live in the real world. They aren't trapped in the TV. The fan meticulously tracks the lives of these actors, noting with immense frustration that Guy Rashny moved to Australia and Yuval Segar moved to New York.
People move. It happens.
Right. And when these voice actors simply relocate their lives for new opportunities, their characters are immediately recast by the studio.
And to the fan, a recast isn't just a logistical necessity, it is a violation of reality.
Because neurologically speaking, when a young viewer bonds with a character, they are bonding with the human voice. The voice is the bridge of empathy. When the voice changes inexplicably between seasons, it triggers a kind of auditory uncanny valley effect.
Oh, that makes sense.
It feels like an imposter took over your best friend. The emotional continuity is violently severed.
Okay, I understand that it's jarring to hear a new voice out of a familiar face, but I really have to push back on isn't this fan being incredibly entitled? I mean, is it really fair to demand that a human being who literally moved their entire life and family to Australia fly all the way back to a tiny recording booth in Israel just to preserve one specific person's childhood memory?
It's a huge ask.
It feels like a fundamental misunderstanding of how the entertainment industry works. Like, people have lives.
It is definitely a demand born of passion rather than pragmatism.
Yeah.
But the YouTuber's frustration raises an incredibly important point about corporate responsibility. You have to look at how these studios market the material. They sell these franchises based entirely on nostalgia.
True, the marketing is relentless.
They weaponize that nostalgia for profit, constantly promising the consumer a return to the exact feelings of their childhood.
So the studios are essentially selling a promise of permanence that they literally do not have the logistical infrastructure to.
Precisely. The fan's entitlement is the direct, inevitable result of the studio's own marketing promise. The studios create this expectation of emotional permanence to sell DVDs and merchandise, but the harsh logistical realities of a small market production pipeline make it impossible to perfectly recreate that alchemy. The fan is just holding the corporation accountable to the corporation's own sales pitch.
Okay, that makes put it like that. So fans are fighting this intense, deeply emotional battle over the auditory memories of their youth. But as we dig deeper into the sources you sent us, we see they are also fighting a literal visual war against the infrastructure of the internet itself.
Yeah.
And the story of how this creator tried to publish their work is a tragic reality for modern media critics.
It really is. The Cartoonime YouTuber spent immense time and effort creating a massive 2-hour video essay, meticulously proving how modern cartoon art styles have degraded from the era they grew up with.
A huge project.
Oh, massive. They had visual evidence lined up, frame by frame, analyzing the transition from the complex, sharp-angled character designs of the 2000s to the simplified, rounded, cost-effective digital puppetry we see today.
It was supposed to be a masterclass in animation critique, but they were completely blocked from showing it to the world. Because of YouTube's automated copyright bots, the Content ID system, the visual evidence was confiscated.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
Like, how does Content ID actually function to strip a creator of their work?
So the algorithm doesn't watch the video and evaluate it like a human judge, right? It's an automated fingerprint system. Massive media corporations upload their entire library of shows into data. The algorithm then creates a digital fingerprint of those pixels and audios.
Okay, so it's pattern recognition.
Exactly. When a creator uploads an essay, the system scans. If it finds a match, even if it's just a 5-second clip being used to critically discuss a shading technique, it automatically flags.
And in this case, It flagged it so severely that the creator was forced to strip out the visual component entirely. They had to upload a visual critique of animation as an audio-only podcast file on Spotify just to get the ideas out.
Which is wild. It transforms a standard piece of video commentary into this like avant-garde, tragic piece of performance art. You have a listener staring at a static thumbnail image on their phone while a creator desperately tries to verbally articulate the exact pixel degradation of a flash animation sequence from a 2008 cartoon.
It is a devastating loss of context. The infrastructure of copyright enforcement is fundamentally incapable of understanding the concept of fair use, which legally protects commentary and criticism.
It's like dealing with a mindless bouncer at a nightclub. You walk up to the door and try to explain that you are on the list, valid reason to be there. You are literally writing an article about the club.
Right, you have a purpose.
Yeah, but the bouncer doesn't speak English. They don't care about fair use. They don't care about nuance. They don't care that this essay has immense cultural value and took 14 years of thought. The bouncer just holds up a digital scanner, sees your footprint, matches a copyrighted pattern owned by a massive corporation, and physically throws you out into...
And when you are thrown into that digital alley and forced onto a platform like Spotify for a visual essay, you lose all control over your content. This brings us to the collapse of digital context and the bizarre algorithmic neighborhood where this 2-hour audio essay ultimately landed.
Oh man, the algorithm's recommendations are staggering. Just picture this. You are a listener. You just finished a 2-hour, highly localized, deeply academic critique of the animation techniques in Ben 10 and Teens.
Okay.
The moment the track ends, the algorithm immediately autoplays a deep lore explanation of the anime one. Following that, it feeds you a podcast about dark web internet creepypasta. And finally, a deep dive into an Argentine teen telenovela called Almost Angel.
It's a complete madhouse of disjointed concepts.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think back to the era of cable television, content was rigidly siloed.
Yeah, TV Guide.
Right, you had a channel dedicated exclusively to kids' cartoons, a channel for news, a channel for soap operas. The context was managed by human scheduler. But this Spotify recommendation algorithm doesn't see genres. It doesn't know what a cartoon is. It sees behavioral clusters.
What do you mean by behavioral clusters? How is the algorithm linking Ben 10 to the dark web?
The algorithm looks at massive data sets of user behavior. It realizes that the statistical profile of a person willing to listen to a 2-hour audio-only rant about cartoon pixel degradation perfectly overlaps with the profile of a hyper-fixated nerd who cares about the intricate backstory of a pirate chef in One Piece, and who also gets a thrill from deep-dive urban legends.
Wow. It's like a grocery store deciding to stop organizing food by aisles for fruit and dairy, and instead organizing the store by things you eat when you're sad at 2 a.m.
That's a brilliant way to look at it.
Ice cream is next to frozen pizza, which is next to an entire block of cheddar cheese. The algorithm prioritizes the depth session over logical, thematic coherence. Obsession is true currency of the digital land.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. And this algorithmic stripping of context doesn't just confuse viewers, it actively radicalizes. When fans feel their pure childhood memories are being erased by automated bots, and they are forced into these bizarre, obsessive digital echo chambers, their intense desire to preserve the localized memory often morphs into something far more combative.
It turns into a militant defense of the canon. Fans will actively fight the original creators over the romantic, social, and moral directory itself, which leads us to one of the most intense documents in the stack provided.
Yes, we are now looking at one of the most heavily debated, scrutinized finales in modern animation, The Legend of Korra. In the sources, we have a highly passionate, rigidly structured critique from a fan that fundamentally rejects the finale's romantic resolution between the two female leads, Korra and Asami.
And before we dive into this, I want to clearly state to you, the listener, that we are treating these sources entirely impartial. The texts we are analyzing contain highly charged political and social viewpoints regarding LGBT representation in media.
Right.
Our goal here is not to endorse nor to condemn them. We are acting as narrative archaeologists. We are going to carefully unpack the exact logic and rhetorical tools the author uses to construct their argument.
Let's begin with a purely narrative critique. The author starts with a surprisingly grounded, hyper-literal, logistical objection to the final scene of the series. In the final moment, Korra and Asami turn to each other, hold hands, and walk into a spirit portal together.
A very famous scene.
Right. The author argues that a physical gesture like holding hands is inherently ambiguous. They state that friends hold hands, and therefore it does not automatically equate to a romantic commitment.
So they are demanding a massive burden of proof from the animation. But the author knows that the franchise didn't end with the television. It continued in official canonical comic where Korra and Asami explicitly kiss and begin dating. So how does the critic handle that undeniable textual evidence from the creator?
This is where their narrative archaeology becomes fast. They refuse to accept the kiss as a guarantee of a permanent, happily ever after. Instead, they map out a specific web of instability, pointing to both characters' paths, highly volatile, failed romantic relationships with a male character named Mega.
So they're treating emotional narrative arcs as raw statistical data.
Exactly.
It's exactly like a fantasy football manager crunching past stat. They are looking at the spreadsheet and saying, because Korra's past relationship with Moko failed, and Asami's past relationship with Moko failed, looking at the historical data, there is absolutely no way she throws a touchdown with Asami. The stats prove they are bad at romance.
But the author goes even deeper into the lore to weaponize the franchise's own expanded canon against itself. They point back to the original predecessor series, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and specifically highlight the fan-favorite couple, Zuko and Mai.
Okay, what happened with them?
In the animated finale of that show, Zuko and Mai get a definitive, happy romantic end. But in the subsequent comic book, they break up.
Oh, wow. So the critic is saying to the fandom, if you want to use the comic book canon to prove Korra and Asami are together because they kissed, you also have to accept the comic book canon that proves definitive couples can and do break up.
Yes.
They are literally using canon law to destroy canon law. It is a highly sophisticated, legalistic, rhetorical move to preserve their desired version of the story.
It is entirely legalistic. However, as we cross-reference this rigid logic with the translated Hebrew text from the forum posts, a massive, glaring double standard is exposed. After spending thousands of words proving the relationship will fail, the author states that they ultimately want both Korra and Asami to have a happy ending, specifically in drama-free romantic relationships with men.
Wait, let me pause you there because this is where the mathematical logic completely fractures. The author just spent all this time proving that their past relationships with men were terrible and fraught with drama, using those specific failures as statistical proof that Korra and Asami are fundamentally bad.
That was their entire thesis, yes.
So if the relationships with men were objectively terrible on paper, why is the author's ultimate ideal solution to send them right back to the exact same gender dynamic that caused all the drama in the first? Like, why is the fantasy of a drama-free resolution only extended to a hypothetical male partner?
To understand this double standard, we have to look at a sociological concept known as the invisible default. In any given culture, certain identities, structures, or behaviors are treated as the absolute baseline of human existence. For the author of our source text, heterosexuality is that invisible default.
It's like gravity. You don't notice gravity until you see a video of an astronaut floating in space, right? For this critic, heterosexuality is the gravity of the narrative universe.
Exactly.
It is considered entirely natural, devoid of any complex ideological theme. Therefore, portraying a male and female character holding hands to a child poses abs threat. It requires zero explanation. It's just a story happening in gravity.
But the author frames a same-sex relationship as zero-G. It is an inherent deviation from that baseline. It breaks the default laws of physics. So suddenly, a same-sex handhold isn't just a story beat. It is viewed as a highly politicized ideological manifesto that requires a strict age 16 firewall to protect the youth.
The author explicitly states they are glad they weren't exposed to this abomination, their word, by the way, until they were 6. That specific age acts as a magical threshold where they believe a young mind is finally mature enough to encounter differing worlds without being irreparably corrupt.
And because they view it as an ideological weapon aimed squarely at the minds of children, their anxiety doesn't stop at the edge of the television screen. We watch this critique of a cartoon finale snowball into a massive societal moral panic pipeline.
The author describes feeling completely overwhelmed by a cultural force they despise, using the aggressive phrase LGBT troll. That phrase alone implies they believe media companies are intentionally inserting this content not for genuine representation or storytelling, but as a deliberate, malicious provocation.
Yes, they see it as a coordinated operation.
A coordinated operation to destabilize traditional values.
They trace a direct, terrifying domino effect in their writing. They genuinely believe the two animated women holding hands in a spirit portal is the first domino. If society doesn't stop it there, it strikes the next domino and the next until you reach the final domino. Inappropriate, illicit book sitting on a shelf in a kindergarten library.
And when the stakes are framed as being that astronomically high, the literal corruption of kindergarten, the author transforms from a media critic dissecting canon into an active cultural auditor.
They really do.
They issue a direct call to action on the forums, demanding their audience audit their local schools, interrogate administrators, and cross-examine young children to root out this perceived ideology. A disagreement over a cartoon literally becomes a catalyst for demanding interrogations of elements.
But what is truly wild is how the author's fear projects into the future of the franchise. They are terrified of a potential sequel series, specifically dreading a hypothetical hypothetical scenario where an older Korra casually mentions she married Asami, an adopted twin.
The author meticulously lists out the exhaustive permutations of these completely imaginary children, twin boys, twin girls, or a boy and a girl, and admits they feel physically repelled just thinking about it. But why the hyperfixation on the twins? Why does an imaginary adopted family trigger such a visceral reaction?
Because of the fear of normalization. I mean, what is the fundamental structure of adopting twins, buying a house, and settling down?
It's the suburbs.
Right. It is the exact, universally recognized blueprint of the traditional boring nuclear family. It's the ultimate symbol of domesticated normalcy.
Well, I see where you're going with this. If a same-sex couple can be portrayed as a boring, stable, domestic nuclear family, it completely annihilates the author's foundational argument. Their entire premise is that this relationship is an inherently dangerous, destabilizing deviation.
Exact. That casual, quiet acceptance, the absolute mundanity of a nuclear family paying a mortgage and raising twins is far more threatening to the author's rigid worldview than any explicit ideological debate. You cannot demonize someone who is living the exact same boring life.
The desperate need to control the narrative, whether that means dictating cultural norms in a library or demanding mathematical perfection from a fantasy romance, drives fans, and as we'll see, characters, to incredible hubris, which transitions us into the literal architecture of...
Yeah, we're moving from the need to control society back to the need to control literal physics. Let's talk about the sunk cost fallacy of fandom and the logistical nightmare of Beyblade Season 4, also known as Zyro Kurogane.
Season 4 is widely acknowledged by this fan and the broader community as an unmitigated disaster. The protagonist was changed, the tone shifted, and the audience rejected. It was so hated that Japanese networks seemingly pulled the plug and stopped airing it halfway through the broadcast to get off the air.
But because of pre-signed international export contract, the animation studio was legally obligated to finish producing the final 60 episodes. The Japanese domestic network canceled the time slot, but the studio had already taken money from foreign distributors, so they had to deliver the final product.
Which created a bizarre reality. This dedicated Israeli fan was desperate for narrative but the episodes weren't dubbed and they weren't even airing in Japanese. She was forced to track down the final 60 episodes in Korean, a language she did not speak or read, just to piece together the visual context and get...
It is the ultimate sunk cost fallacy. Have you ever sat through a terrible 3-hour movie just because you already paid for the ticket and you need to see how it ends?
Oh, absolutely.
That is what this fan did on a massive scale. She hates the new protagonist. The Japanese creators seemingly abandoned the project, but she still subjects herself to dozens of hours of foreign language media just to see the final piece of the puzzle placed on.
And that deep, burning need for narrative resolution is what drives her brilliant, unassailable logic regarding the death of her favorite villain, Ryuga, the character with the pops. At the end of Season 3, Ryuga seemingly dies, fading into the sky after passing his power, but the animation is deliberately vague. It's the classic anime, face smiling in the clouds.
Right, but in Season 4, a new character named Sakio appears, wielding a physical top called Ronin Dragoon. This top is explicitly stated within the lore to be the only reverse rotation left spinning bay ever created. That left spinning mechanic was Ryuga's exclusive signature gimmick.
So the narrative is clearly implying a spiritual passing of the torch, a symbolic inheritance, but the fan refuses to accept the symbol. She applies literal, real-world ghost physics to this magical anime.
Ghost physics?
Yes. She argues that if Sakio received this physical top from Ryuga absolutely cannot be dead. Why? Because a ghost cannot physically hand you a dense piece of left-spinning metal. It would fall right through their ethereal hands.
It is a phenomenal application of mundane thermodynamic laws to a magical universe solely to cope with the grief of a character's ambiguous death. It shows how intellect and logic can be weaponized by a fan to rationalize their desired reality and reject the author's intent.
And if we are talking about weaponizing intellect to rationalize a desired reality, we have to pivot to the ultimate narrative study of intellectual hubris, Death Note.
Death Note. It is a masterclass in psychological horror and strategic tension. The premise is simple: a notebook that kills anyone whose name is written inside. But before we get to the legendary chess match of the main series, our sources highlight a piece of media archaeology, the Forgotten Pilot chapter, which sets the moral baseline for the entire concept.
Yes, the tarot pilot. Before a megalomaniac got the notebook, the original draft of the story had the book fall into the hands of a completely average, relentlessly bullied 13-year-old named Taro.
Just a normal kid.
Right. He finds it, thinks it's a cheap diary, and uses it to vent his frustration, methodically writing down the names of the bullies tormenting him at school.
And when those bullies actually drop dead of heart attacks the next day, Taro doesn't experience a rush of godlike power. He experiences profound terror, nausea, and paralyzing guilt. He realizes he is a murderer, and in this Forgotten Pilot, The Shinigami, the death god who dropped the notebook, offers Taro a bizarre, exclusive mechanic that doesn't exist in the main series, the Death Racer.
A literal magic eraser from if you erase a name from the notebook, the victim comes back. It's the ultimate Control-Z for murder. Taro and a classmate scramble in pure panic the eraser to undo the apocalyptic bloodbath they act, and eventually society burns the book, sweeping its own fragility rug.
Taro's story shows the chaos of accidental power that a human actively rejects because their conscience cannot bear the weight. But that narrative begs the ultimate question, which the author, Tsugumi Oba, explored in the main series. What happens when the user isn't traumatized, but arrogant? What happens when this weapon falls into the hands of someone who doesn't want an erase?
Enter Light Yagami, a high school prodigy, pristine academic record, flawless social facade, and an intense, simmering disdain for society. When Light finds the notebook and tests it, his psychological staggering. He doesn't vomit. He doesn't seek an eraser.
Because if he sought an eraser, he would have to admit he made a mistake. Instead, he weaponizes his massive intellect to construct psychological armor. To prevent his ego from collapsing under the weight of guilt for his first kills, he adopts a philosophy of cold mathematics. He labels his victims as parasites, dehumanizing them, and brainwashes himself into believing that mass murder is a noble sacrifice for the greater good of humanity.
He builds a god complex to avoid facing the reality that he's just a serial killer with a magic trick. But absolute power breeds absolute resistance. And this leads to the greatest strategic trap in anime history, the Lindell Taylor broadcast. Explain the mechanics of this trap because it is brilliant.
The world's greatest detective, known only as L, is hunting Light, who the public calls Kira. L hijacks a television broadcast to issue a live challenge. He places a man named Lindell Taylor on screen, claiming this man is L, and proceeds to mock Kira's supposed divinity, basically calling him evil.
Now, a truly rational, cold-blooded killer would have recognized the bait. They would have turned off the TV, sat back, and realized they held all the cards. But Light's massive, fragile ego cannot handle being defied in public. It's a temper tantrum. He immediately writes the name down, executing the man live on air to prove his supremacy.
And that is exactly when L's voice comes over the broadcast, revealing the trap. The broadcast wasn't global. It was regionally locked entirely to the Kanto region of Japan. By watching Kira react instantaneously to a localized broadcast, L shrinks the global suspect pool from billions of people down to a single zip code. It is an absolute humiliating gut punch to Light's narcissism.
But Light doesn't retreat and hide. His hubris forces him to escalate. When he discovers an FBI agent named Ray Pember is tailing him, he doesn't just kill him quietly. He orchestrates a terrifyingly manipulative bus hijacking trap. He forces the agent to show his badge, stealing his name, and then he uses the notebook's ability to dictate a victim's actions before death to control Pember like a puppet, forcing the agent to write down the names of every other FBI agent before dying of a heart attack.
Light single-handedly slaughters the entire task force, but his arrogance creates a radioactive loose end. Naomi Mizora, Pember's grieving fiancée, and a brilliant former FBI agent herself. She deduces Kira's secret ability to control victims before death and marches straight toward the police station to expose.
The tension when Light intercepts her in the lobby is unbearable. She feeds him a fake name to protect herself. When Light writes it down on a hidden scrap of the notebook and she doesn't die, he realizes she outsmarted him. He is trapped in a desperately narrow window to dismantle her psychological defenses before she reaches the detective.
The sheer psychopathy of his cleanup is chilling. He adopts the persona of L's secret operative, gaslights her into trusting him, and finally extracts her true identification. He then writes a specific cruel command. She must commit suicide in a location where her body will never be discovered, ensuring the police have no evidence.
He ensures that her final lucid moment is the paralyzing horror of realizing she handed her life to the killer. It's a masterclass in cruelty. But as the net tightens, L places Light under 24/7 video surveillance. L creates a literal panopticon in Light's bed. Light is being watched from dozens of angles.
Which leads to the famous potato chip bag trick. Can you explain the cognitive load required to execute this?
It is absurd. To maintain the illusion of innocence while continuing the slaughter, Light buys a bag of potato chips. Inside the bag, hidden from the cameras, he has placed a miniature portable TV and a scrap of the death note. He sits at his desk, visibly studying for his high school exams, with his hands seemingly busy.
He looks like a normal teenager.
Exact. But with his other hand, he reaches into the bag, watches the news on the mini TV, and uses a concealed pen to write down the names of criminals being brought. It requires a split-screen brain. He is managing immense cognitive load-solving advanced math problems on the desk while committing mass murder in a chip bag, all while projecting total innocence to the cameras.
It's an architecture of pure hubris. But eventually, Light is completely cornered by L. To escape the electric chair, Light executes the ultimate alibi. He legally relinquishes ownership of the notebook, which triggers a magical rule that completely erases all of his memories of ever being Kira.
It is a self-inflicted lobotomy. It's exactly like formatting your computer's hard drive to pass a malware scan by the FBI, but leaving a highly complex, time-delayed script buried in the code to reinstall the virus months later.
That's the perfect way to describe it. And the light Yagami that wakes up in police custody is genuinely innocent in his own mind. He screams with righteous indignation that he has been framed. A lie detector cannot catch a man who genuinely believes his own innocence.
He works alongside L to catch the new corporate, and the exact second Light's fingers touch the recovered, the memories violently download back. He seamlessly slips the sociopathic mask back. A fake 13-day rule legally clears and ultimately forces a Shinigami.
Death Note shows how intellect can be weaponized to rationalize atrocity, suppress guilt, and build an impenetrable fortress of hubris. But this transitions us to our final deep dive, which shows exactly what happens when a story forces its characters to stop suppressing their darkness and finally integrate their childhood.
Okay, here is where we get into the decades-delayed epiphany. We are looking at the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Asa. The Israeli YouTuber from Cartoonime realized a massive paradigm-shifting lore connection at age 28, a full 14 years after she originally watched the show.
This massive delay in understanding the plot wasn't just due to the complexity of the narrative. It was caused by the harsh realities of international syndication that we discussed earlier. The Israeli network, Eretz Hayaledim, abruptly canceled the broadcast of Season 3 around Episode 30, right as the narrative was reaching critical mass.
It's like spending months putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle of the Mona Lisa, but the manufacturer only put 600 pieces in the box, and they threw away all the pieces that make up the face. You just have to hold those incomplete, disjointed pieces in your mind for over a decade.
And when she finally acquired the missing pieces as an adult, she uncovered a stunning piece of visual DNA. The fan discovered that a modern character, Jesse Anderson, shares the exact hex code color, specifically the teal eyes and split-tone hair, with the ancient human form of the terrifying monster Yubel.
Before we go further, ELI5, what a hex code match means for animation. Like, is it possible this is just a coincidence?
In digital animation, a hex code is a specific 6-digit alphanumeric sequence that dictates the exact mathematical shade of a color. It's not just blue. It's a highly specific coordinate on the color spectrum. For two characters to share the exact same hex codes for both hair and eyes across millions of years of lore is not an accident. The character designer intentionally planted a silent flag in the ground to prove a biological or spiritual lineage.
But the visual DNA also highlights Yubel's monstrous trans. Yubel's modern monster form is violently split down the middle, half male, half female, with asymmetrical eyes and a split chest. It looks chaotic.
The YouTuber theorizes this is a mechanical, botched magic spell from the lore. But if we look deeper at the psychology of the show, this stark physical division is a brilliant, agonizing physical manifestation of a psychologically fractured mind. Yubel is literally torn between the humanity they sacrificed and the demonic power they accepted to protect the protagonist, Jaden.
And the audio localization completely ruined this nuance. In the original Japanese broadcast, Yubel speaks with overlapping dissonant male and female voice tracks simultaneously. It sounds like a frack.
It's so creepy and effective.
But for Kids Entertainment, the Western localizer, was terrified of gender ambiguity for a children's audience. So they erased the dual track, giving Yubel a standard, single female voice, completely flattening the character's profound trauma into a generic evil sorceress.
It literally erases the auditory evidence of a shattered soul. And to understand why Yubel is so shattered, we have to look at the cosmic tragedy of their origin. In ancient times, human Yubel sacrificed everything to become an immortal guardian for the young prince. In the modern era, the young, traumatized Jaden uses the Yubel card as a coping mechanism.
Right. Jaden is a lonely latchkey kid, and Yubel is his imaginary protector. It's exactly like getting an overly aggressive guard dog because you are a lonely kid living in a dangerous neighborhood.
The dog protects you, sure.
Yes, the dog keeps the burglars away, but it lacks discernment. It bites the mailman, it bites your friends, it chases away anyone who tries to get close to you, and it leaves you perfectly safe, but devastated alone.
So Jaden, desperate to fix his protector and have normal friends, outsources his trauma. He launches the Yubel card into the cold, infinite void of space, hoping cosmic energy will cure it. Instead, Yubel is exposed to the corrupting light of destruction.
Imagine the psychological horror of that. Yubel is sitting in the freezing dark of space, suffering unimaginable cosmic agony, abandoned by the exact boy they sacrificed their humanity for. To prevent their mind from completely breaking, Yubel rewrites their psychological equation. They decide that if Jaden did this to them, then love. Therefore, to show Jaden ultimate devotion, Yubel must inflict maximum pain upon.
It is a terrifying Shakespearean level of jealousy and grief. When Yubel eventually returns to Earth and sees Jaden showering affection on Jesse Anderson, who is literally the human descendant of Yubel's own lost humanity, Yubel violently possesses Jesse's body. They hijack their own human bloodline out of sheer terror of being replaced.
It is so dark and brilliant, and the resolution of this conflict is the ultimate lesson in psychologization. Because Jaden doesn't defeat Yubel with a bigger laser beam or a magical MacGuffin.
No, Jaden reclaims a specific card, super polymerization. Throughout the arc, this card was used by Jaden's evil shadow self, the Supreme King, to forcefully absorb enemies and detach from his own guilt. It was a weapon of emotional suppression and conquest.
But in the climax, Jaden uses super polymerization on himself. He consciously chooses to fuse his soul with Yubel. He looks at this broken, twisted monster that has caused him so much pain, validates the sacrifice they made, and takes absolute, unconditional accountability for his shadow self. Integration over destruction. He doesn't run from his past, he absorbs it.
He recognizes that you cannot banish the toxic, traumatized parts of your psyche into space. You have to integrate them into your adult self. And after surviving this cosmic war and integrating his shadow, Jaden returns to school, only to face an even more insidious villain.
The final boss of the entire series isn't a god. The final boss is just a guy named Dark. And Darkness doesn't use lasers. He uses the literal manifestation of graduation anxiety, imposter syndrome, and the paralyzing dread.
Darkness weaponizes the mundane void of the unknown. He shows the students visions of their adult lives filled with failure, mediocrity, and broken dreams. He preys on the suffocating fear of trying to live up to the legacies of the people who came before them.
And the heroes win not by relying on past legends. When offered the legendary replica deck of Yugi Muto, the ultimate validation from they decline. They realize they have to evolve their own messy legacy, infused with their own struggles, rather than hiding behind someone else.
It is a profound realization that defeating your inner demon is only the prerequisite for the real challenge, navigating the complex, unforgiving reality of everyday adult life without a safe.
Okay, let's take a breath and recap the incredible ground we've covered today. We started by examining the specific hex codes of a character's hair and the pop star breath control of a localized demon. We navigated the sheer trauma of algorithmic copyright bouncers throwing 2-hour essays into Spotify ghost town. We impartially analyzed the rigorous, hyper-literal mathematical architecture of a moral panic surrounding the legend of Korra. We broke down the sociopathic hubris of formatting your own memory and death, and we witnessed a boy integrating his darkest psychological shadow to survive the mundane dread of...
What this all proves, looking at this 14-year digital footprint, is that consuming pop culture is never a passive act. It is a constant, active negotiation with our own identities, our own traumas, and the invisible infrastructures that deliver this art to us.
Exactly. But before we sign off, we want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. Something to mull over on your own that builds on the incredible source material you shared.
If we look back at the intense moral panic over the legend of Korra, the critic operated on one massive, unshakable assumption. That media creates societal reality. They believed that a cartoon romance was an active engine driving cultural change, coercing the youth, and programming the future.
But what if that foundational assumption is entirely backward?
Is it possible that media actually does not possess the power to shape a society's core values from scratch? What if media is simply a lagging indicator?
Is the glowing screen in the living room just a rearview mirror, reflecting a massive, tectonic societal shift that has already permanently occurred in the streets outside?
If the cartoon is just a rearview mirror, then fighting a desperate militant battle against the television screen won't stop the change, because the reality you fear has already been firmly established outside your window. The media is just finally catching up to the world.
It makes you wonder if that time capsule we talked about isn't holding a record, but merely a record of the film. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep questioning the media, keep examining the infrastructure that delivers it, and we will be right here next time.